My name is Morgan Taylor, and I was 14 years old when my dad abandoned me at Union Station in Chicago. I still remember how the November cold seeped through my jacket as I waited, watching the station clock tick away hours while my calls went to voicemail. What I didn't know then was that he'd chosen a theme park day with his new wife and twins over picking up his firstborn. The text, when it finally came, changed everything about how I saw my father, myself, and what family really means. Before I tell you how I went from abandoned teen to successful adult, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming family betrayal like the one I'm about to share. I was born to parents who seemed happy, at least through a child's eyes. My mom, Jessica, was a dental hygienist, and my dad, Brian, worked in sales. We lived in a modest house in a suburb of Milwaukee, and my early childhood memories are filled with weekend trips to the lake, family movie nights, and Dad teaching me to ride a bike. Looking back, I can see the cracks that formed around the time I turned 7, but children are remarkably good at ignoring what they don't want to see. The fighting started small, disagreements about bills, schedules, and household responsibilities. By the time I was 9, those small arguments had become full-blown shouting matches behind closed doors. I'd hide under my covers with my stuffed rabbit, Franklin, trying to block out the sounds. When they finally sat me down to explain their divorce, Dad promised nothing would change between us. "You'll still see me all the time, Morgie," he said, using my childhood nickname. "We just won't all live in the same house." The custody arrangement gave Mom primary custody, with Dad having me every other weekend and Wednesday dinners. For the first year, this worked well enough. Dad rented a one-bedroom apartment and set up a pull-out sofa in the living room for my visits. He'd take me to the movies, help with my homework, and keep up with my school activities. We had Friday pizza nights and Saturday morning pancakes, rituals that made the new arrangement feel almost normal. When I was 11, everything changed. Dad met Diane at a work conference in Minneapolis. She was pretty, with professionally highlighted blonde hair and a laugh that seemed to make the room brighter. The first time Dad introduced us was at a casual lunch. Diane brought me a bracelet with little silver charms and asked all about school and my friends. "Your dad talks about you constantly," she said, and I remember feeling a warm glow of importance. Over the next few months, Diane became a fixture in our weekends. Dad's focus subtly shifted. Instead of our usual activities, we'd do things Diane enjoyed. Our movie nights now included romantic comedies instead of the adventure films we both loved. Our Saturday morning pancake tradition was replaced by brunches at trendy cafes where Diane knew the staff. By the time I turned 12, Dad had moved into Diane's larger house in a more upscale neighborhood. I got my own room there, painted lavender, Diane's choice, though I'd mentioned blue was my favorite color, with new furniture that matched the rest of her tastefully decorated home. The old, comfortable couch where Dad and I used to watch TV was replaced by a pristine white sectional where I was constantly worried about spilling something. I tried to like Diane. I really did. She wasn't unkind, but there was always something slightly dismissive in her manner toward me. She'd listen politely when I talked about school, but would quickly redirect conversations to topics that interested her more. When I'd bring up memories with Dad, she'd smile tightly and change the subject. "That was before Morgan," Dad once said when I reminisced about our camping trip to the Dells. "We're making new memories now." 6 months after Dad moved in with Diane, they announced their engagement. 2 months after that, at their small wedding, I was a junior bridesmaid in a dress I hated, standing beside Diane's nieces who whispered about how my shoes were so last season. Dad seemed barely to notice I was there, his eyes fixed on Diane throughout the ceremony and reception. The real turning point came when I was 13 and Diane gave birth to twins, a boy and girl they named Connor and Chloe. Dad was ecstatic, taking a month off work to help with the newborns. My weekend visits became irregular. "The babies are too fussy right now," he'd explain when canceling. Or, "Diane needs me here, you understand, right?" I did understand, more than he realized. I understood I was being replaced. Mom tried to compensate for Dad's growing absence. She picked up extra shifts at the dental office and started weekend work at a coffee shop to make up for Dad's increasingly forgotten child support payments. Despite her exhaustion, she'd ask about my day, help with school projects, and try to make our smaller, quieter home feel warm. "Your dad loves you," she'd insist on nights when I'd cry after another canceled visit. "He's just adjusting to the babies. It'll get better." But it didn't get better. By the summer before high school, my Wednesday dinners had been reduced to once a month, if that. Weekend visits happened maybe once every 6 weeks instead of biweekly. When I did go to Dad's house, I spent most of my time watching him and Diane coo over the twins. Connor had Dad's eyes, they'd marvel. Chloe had his smile. I'd sit on the periphery, wondering if they even remembered I had his dimples and the same cowlick at the back of my head. The twins' first birthday party was a lavish affair with professional decorations, personalized cakes, and a photographer. Dad introduced me to his new colleagues as my older daughter without using my name. One of Diane's friends asked if I was the babysitter. "This is Morgan," Dad finally said, his arm around my shoulder in a gesture that felt performative. "She's 14 going on 24, aren't you, kiddo?" He laughed, and I forced a smile, though inside I was screaming that he didn't even know me anymore. I wasn't a serious, mature teenager. I collected silly keychains, watched cartoons, and still slept with Franklin the rabbit hidden under my pillow when I was sad. When Thanksgiving approached that year, I was surprised when Dad suggested I come for the extended weekend. Mom had to work Black Friday, and she was visibly relieved when I told her Dad had invited me to Chicago. "That'll be nice, honey," she said, though I caught the skeptical look she tried to hide. "I'll feel better knowing you're not alone while I'm working." The plan was for me to take the train from Milwaukee to Chicago on Wednesday afternoon. Dad would pick me up at Union Station, and I'd stay until Sunday. 5 whole days with my father, the longest stretch in over a year. Despite everything, I felt a flutter of hope. Maybe he did want to reconnect. Maybe the twins were old enough now that he had time for me again. I packed carefully, including small gifts for the twins and a framed photo of Dad and me from a fishing trip when I was 10. I even brought the bracelet Diane had given me during our first meeting, though I'd never particularly liked it. I wanted to make an effort, to show I was trying. Mom drove me to the Milwaukee station, helping with my suitcase and backpack. "Text me when you get there," she said, hugging me tightly. "And call if you need anything at all." "I'll be fine, Mom," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. As the train pulled away, I watched her figure grow smaller on the platform, waving until she disappeared from view. I didn't know then that this simple trip would become the defining moment of my relationship with my father, or what was left of it. The train ride from Milwaukee to Chicago takes about an hour and a half on the Amtrak Hiawatha service. I settled into my window seat, watching the Wisconsin countryside gradually give way to the Illinois suburbs. I texted Dad when we departed, and he responded promptly. "See you at Union Station. Track 19. Can't wait, Morgie." That childhood nickname gave me a surge of warmth. Maybe things would be different this time. I spent the journey imagining the weekend ahead. Perhaps we'd visit the Museum of Science and Industry like we used to when I was younger. Maybe we get deep dish pizza from Giordano's, where Dad always let me have the gooey middle piece. I even fantasized about helping with the twins, showing Dad I could be a good big sister if given the chance. The train arrived at Union Station right on schedule at 4:15 p.m. The grand old building was bustling with pre-Thanksgiving travelers, everyone rushing to make connections or meet loved ones. I navigated through the crowd toward Track 19, pulling my suitcase behind me, my backpack heavy with schoolwork I'd brought to complete over the weekend. I positioned myself near the large clock at our agreed meeting spot, scanning the faces for Dad's familiar features. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I checked my phone, no messages. Not unusual, he was probably parking or caught in traffic. By 4:45, I sent a text. "I'm at Track 19 under the big clock. You close?" 3 dots appeared, then, "Traffic is bad. Be there soon." Relief washed over me. He was coming, he was just late. I settled onto a bench, watching families reunite around me. A grandmother embracing grandchildren. Parents greeting college students home for the holiday. The normal rhythms of family life that somehow always seemed just out of my reach. By 5:30, the station was less crowded, most of the earlier arrivals having dispersed to their holiday destinations. I called Dad's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm still waiting at track 19. Let me know when you're close." At 6 p.m., as the November darkness pressed against the station windows, I called again. Voicemail. I texted. No response. A strange feeling began to creep up my spine, something beyond mere annoyance at being kept waiting. My stomach clenched with a familiar anxiety, the same feeling I got when Dad would cancel plans at the last minute. At 6:45, my phone finally pinged with a text, running really late. "So sorry." I responded immediately, "It's okay." "How much longer?" No response. By 7:30 p.m., the station had taken on that hollow, echoing quality of public spaces after the rush has ended. My earlier excitement had long since faded, replaced by gnawing worry and the first tendrils of humiliation. I was hungry, having eaten nothing since a sandwich on the train, but I was afraid to leave my spot in case Dad arrived. At 8:12 p.m., nearly 4 hours after my arrival, the message came that would change everything. "Morgan, I'm really sorry, but I can't make it tonight. The twins are sick with high fevers. Diane needs my help. Can you take the train back to Milwaukee? I'll pay you back for the ticket. Really sorry about this." I stared at the message, reading it over and over as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. "Sick twins. Can't make it. Take the train back." My fingers hovered over the keyboard, not knowing how to respond. Before I could form a coherent thought, my phone pinged with an Instagram notification. One of my school friends had liked a post. Absently, I opened the app, momentarily distracted from my predicament. And there, at the top of my feed, was a post from Diane's sister that she'd tagged both Dad and Diane in. "Family fun day at Six Flags Great America. The twins' first roller coaster. Hashtag family tradition, hashtag making memories." The photo showed Dad, his face split in a wide grin, holding Connor on his shoulders. Diane beside him with Chloe, all of them wearing matching Santa hats in front of a Christmas-themed ride. The timestamp, 2 hours ago. My hands began to shake so badly I nearly dropped my phone. The twins weren't sick. There was no emergency. My father had simply chosen a day at an amusement park over picking up his daughter and then lied about it. The physical reaction was immediate and overwhelming. My heart hammered against my ribs. My breathing became shallow and quick. The Grand Station Hall seemed to tilt and spin around me as the truth sank in. I hadn't just been forgotten or inconvenienced. I had been deliberately abandoned. I must have been visibly in distress, because a security officer approached my bench. She was an older woman with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a neat bun, her dark uniform crisp despite the late hour of her shift. "Are you okay, miss?" she asked, her voice professional but kind. "Have you been waiting here a while?" I couldn't answer. My throat had closed up, and the tears I'd been holding back for hours finally spilled over. All I could do was show her my phone with the damning evidence, Dad's line text next to the theme park photo. "My dad," I finally managed to choke out. "He's not coming." I should have called my mom immediately. That would have been the sensible thing to do. But I couldn't bear the thought of worrying her while she was at work, knowing she'd drop everything to help me. She was already working double shifts to compensate for Dad's sporadic child support. The thought of causing her more problems was unbearable. But now, under the security officer's concerned gaze, I realized I had no choice. I was a minor alone in a train station as evening deepened into night. I had nowhere to go and not enough money for a hotel. "I need to call my mom," I whispered, the admission feeling like defeat. The security officer, whose name badge read Rachel, nodded and stayed with me as I made the call. Mom answered on the first ring. "Morgan? Is everything okay?" Her voice, warm and immediately concerned, broke what little composure I had left. Between sobs, I explained what had happened, the long wait, Dad's text, the Instagram post revealing the truth. The silence on the other end of the line lasted only seconds, but felt eternal. When Mom spoke again, her voice had changed to harder, colder than I'd ever heard it. "Put the security officer on the phone, please." I handed my phone to Rachel, who spoke quietly with my mother for several minutes, nodding and making notes in a small pad. When she handed the phone back, Mom's plan was in motion. "Morgan, listen to me," she said, her voice now deliberately calm. "Rachel is going to stay with you while I arrange for a return ticket. There's a train leaving at 10:30 that will get you back to Milwaukee by midnight. I'll meet you at the station." "But Mom, your shift." "I'm leaving work now. Some things are more important. I've already called my boss." The next 4 hours in Union Station were among the most miserable of my life. Rachel brought me a sandwich and soda from the station cafe, but I could barely eat. She sat with me until her shift ended, then handed me off to another officer who helped me purchase the return ticket with Mom's credit card information. The station had largely emptied by then, but there were still enough late travelers that I didn't feel completely alone. Still, every happy family I saw, parents with sleepy children, couples reuniting, friends greeting each other with hugs, was like a twist of the knife. Normal families didn't do this to each other. Normal fathers didn't abandon their daughters for amusement parks. The return journey was a blur. I sat in an almost empty train car, watching my reflection in the dark window as we sped through the night. I looked pale, my eyes red-rimmed from crying. I felt hollowed out, as if something essential had been scooped from my chest. Mom was waiting on the platform when we pulled into Milwaukee, just as she promised. Her hair was disheveled, her work scrubs still on beneath her winter coat. When she saw me step off the train, she ran forward and wrapped me in an embrace so tight it almost hurt. "I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered against my hair. "I'm so sorry. We didn't talk much on the drive home." What was there to say? Mom kept reaching across the center console to squeeze my hand, as if reassuring herself I was really there. I stared out the window, watching the familiar streets of our neighborhood come into view. That night, lying in my bed with Franklin the rabbit clutched to my chest, no longer caring if that was childish, I scrolled through old photos on my phone. Dad teaching me to fish. Dad at my 5th grade graduation. Dad and me making silly faces at the camera during a road trip 2 summers ago. Had he loved me then? Did he love me now? How could someone who loved their child leave them alone in a train station while they rode roller coasters with their real family? As exhaustion finally pulled me towards sleep around 3 a.m., a terrible thought surfaced. Maybe I should delete all these photos. Maybe I should erase every trace of him, the way he seemed to be trying to erase me from his life. I fell asleep with my thumb hovering over the delete button, too drained to make even that simple decision. Thanksgiving Day dawned gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. Mom had called in sick to her coffee shop job, forfeiting the holiday pay she desperately needed. The guilt of that sat heavy on my shoulders as I dragged myself out of bed. "We don't need to do anything special," I told her, finding her in the kitchen already preparing a small turkey. "It's just the 2 of us." Mom turned from the stove, her expression fierce with the maternal protectiveness I hadn't seen before. "We are going to have Thanksgiving dinner," she said firmly. "We're going to make new traditions, just us. And we're going to be okay." I didn't believe her, but I nodded anyway. The security officer, Rachel, had given me her card before I left Union Station. "If you need to talk," she'd said, "sometimes it's easier with someone who isn't family." I'd tucked the card into my wallet, not imagining I'd ever use it. But as Mom and I moved around each other in our small kitchen, the weight of what had happened became unbearable. I excused myself, went to my room, and dialed Rachel's number with shaking fingers. "Union Station Security, Officer Michael speaking." Her voice was as steady and kind as I remembered. "This is Morgan," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "From last night." "Morgan," she said, and I could hear the recognition and concern. "How are you doing, honey?" The simple question broke the dam. I sank to the floor beside my bed and told her everything, not just about being abandoned at the station, but about the years of gradual rejection, the canceled visits, the growing sense that I'd been replaced by Dad's new family. "I keep thinking about what I did wrong," I confessed, tears streaming down my face. Was I too much trouble? Did I talk too much? Not enough? Should I have tried harder with Diane? With the twins? Rachel listened without interrupting, and when I finally ran out of words, her response was gentle but firm. Morgan, I want you to listen to me very carefully, she said. What happened yesterday, what's been happening for years, is not your fault. Children don't earn their parents' love, they deserve it unconditionally. Then why doesn't he love me anymore? The question escaped before I could stop it, raw and painful. I can't answer that, Rachel said honestly. But I can tell you this, his failure to be the father you deserve is about his shortcomings, not yours. We talked for nearly an hour. Rachel told me about her own difficult relationship with her father, how she'd eventually built a life filled with chosen family who valued her. She recommended a support group for teens with absent parents that met at a community center near my home. By the time we hung up, I felt marginally better, not healed, but perhaps like healing might someday be possible. When I returned to the kitchen, Mom took one look at my face and opened her arms. I fell into them, clinging to her like I had as a much younger child. I called Rachel, I admitted. The security officer from last night. Mom stroked my hair. Good. I'm glad. Sometimes we need to talk to someone outside the situation. We ate our small Thanksgiving dinner at the kitchen table rather than in the dining room we rarely used. Mom had made all my favorites, sweet potato casserole with extra marshmallows, cranberry sauce from the can because I preferred the ridges, and stuffing with extra celery. I was thinking, Mom said as we cleared the dishes, that maybe we could look into some counseling for you. For both of us, maybe. I tensed. We'd never had much extra money, and I knew therapy wasn't cheap. Mom, we can't afford. I found a sliding scale place, she interrupted. And my insurance from the dental office will cover part of it. I already called. The realization that she'd been making these arrangements while I slept brought fresh tears to my eyes. While Dad was abandoning me at train stations, Mom was moving mountains to make sure I had what I needed. That night, as we watched a movie together on our old couch, my phone lit up with a text. Dad, hope you made it home okay? Sorry again about yesterday. The twins caught something at daycare. The lie, so blatant after the photographic evidence I'd seen, made my stomach churn. I showed Mom the message without comment. Her jaw tightened, but her voice remained calm. You don't have to respond right now. Or ever if you don't want to. I turned the phone face down on the coffee table. I don't even know what I would say. Over the next few days, I withdrew further. I didn't respond to texts from friends asking about Thanksgiving. I skipped a Sunday study group I'd committed to. I picked at my food and slept fitfully, often waking from dreams where I was endlessly waiting in cavernous train stations. Mom watched with growing concern but gave me space, perhaps recognizing I needed time to process what had happened. 5 days after Thanksgiving, I finally texted Dad back with a single question. Why? No response came that day. Or the next. By the weekend, I'd given up on getting an answer, which felt like yet another abandonment. Then, in mid-December, a package arrived addressed to me. Inside was a gift, a pair of expensive headphones I'd mentioned wanting months ago, and a generic card with "Merry Christmas" printed inside. Dad had signed it, but there was no personal message, no acknowledgement of what had happened, no response to my question. Something inside me hardened. I repacked the headphones, wrote "Return to sender" on the box, and asked Mom to mail it back to him. 2 days later, my phone rang with Dad's number. Against my better judgment, I answered. What the hell, Morgan? His voice was angry, indignant. Those headphones cost $300. The fact that this, a returned gift, was what finally prompted him to call spoke volumes. I don't want them, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. This is exactly the kind of ungrateful attitude that makes it so difficult, he snapped. Diane says I bend over backward trying to make you happy, and this is the thanks I get. Something in me snapped. All the hurt, confusion, and anger of the past weeks, of the past years, boiled over. Difficult? Difficult? You left me alone in a train station for hours while you went to Six Flags. You lied about the twins being sick. And you think I'm being difficult? There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, his voice cold, I see Jess has been filling your head with her version of events. I saw the Instagram photos, I shot back. Posted while I was sitting alone at Union Station. That's not Mom's version, that's reality. Dad's tone shifted, becoming the placating voice he used when trying to smooth things over after a canceled visit. Look, Morgie, I'm sorry about the station. That was bad planning on my part. But you need to understand that my life is complicated now. I have responsibilities to Diane and the twins. And not to me. My voice broke on the question. His sigh was heavy with impatience. You're older. More independent. Connor and Chloe need me in a different way. I need you too, I whispered, hating how small I sounded. What you need, he said with finality, is an attitude adjustment. When you're ready to accept my new family and stop making everything so dramatic, we can talk about resuming visits. Until then, I think we all need a break from this tension. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was placing the blame for his abandonment on me, framing his neglect as my failure to accommodate his new life. Morgan. Mom's voice came from my doorway. I hadn't realized she'd been listening. I looked up, tears streaming down my face, and wordlessly handed her the phone. Mom's transformation as she took the call was something to behold. Her normally gentle voice became steel. Brian, this is Jessica. Let me make something abundantly clear to you. What you did at that train station wasn't bad planning. It was child abandonment. You left our 14-year-old daughter alone in Chicago while you were at an amusement park. Then you lied about it. I could hear Dad's voice rising on the other end, but Mom cut him off. No, you don't get to speak right now. For years, I've covered for you with Morgan. I've made excuses for your canceled visits and forgotten child support. I've told her that you love her even when your actions said otherwise. I'm done doing that. Her eyes met mine, fierce with a mother's love. Morgan deserves better than you. She deserves a father who shows up, who makes her a priority, who doesn't abandon her in train stations and then blame her for being upset about it. Until you can be that father, stay away from my daughter. She ended the call and sat beside me on the bed, pulling me into her arms as I sobbed with a mixture of grief and relief. Someone had finally said aloud what I'd felt for so long. This wasn't right, and it wasn't my fault. That night marked the beginning of a new phase in my life, one where I stopped waiting for Dad to become the father I needed and started learning how to live without him. Christmas that year was a subdued affair. Mom had picked up extra shifts to make up for the Thanksgiving day she'd missed, so we celebrated on Christmas Eve instead. Our tiny artificial tree looked sparse with just a few presents beneath it, but Mom had wrapped each one with care, adding hand-drawn designs to the plain paper we could afford. It's not much, she apologized as I opened my gifts, a new journal, colored pens, a second-hand sweater in my favorite blue, and a collection of short stories by my favorite author. It's perfect, I told her, and meant it. The thoughtfulness behind each item meant more than the expensive headphones Dad had sent without any real knowledge of what mattered to me now. I'd bought Mom a scarf I'd saved up for from my babysitting money and made her a photo frame from Craft Supplies, with a picture of the two of us at the lake last summer. She cried when she opened it, which made me cry too, and we ended up laughing at ourselves through our tears. We're quite the pair, she said, wiping her eyes. The best pair, I responded, and in that moment, our little two-person Christmas felt complete in a way the elaborate celebrations at Dad and Diane's never had. The week between Christmas and New Year's brought an unexpected text from Dad, Merry Christmas. The twins loved their presents. Hope you got my gift card. He had indeed sent a gift card to a clothing store after the returned headphones debacle, a generic, impersonal gift that required no knowledge of my current interests or needs. I hadn't acknowledged it, and his text carried a subtle note of reproach for my silence. I showed the message to Mom, who had become my sounding board for all Dad-related communications. You don't have to respond, she reminded me. But if you want to, that's okay too. After consideration, I sent back a simple, Merry Christmas. Nothing more. No mention of the gift card, no questions about his holiday. The brevity felt like its own kind of power. I was no longer desperately seeking his attention or approval. January brought the start of therapy with Dr. Keller, a woman with a warm smile and an office filled with plants. Mom had found her through a community mental health center that offered sliding scale fees. I don't know what to say, I admitted during our first session, perched awkwardly on the edge of her couch. You don't have to know, Dr. Keller said. We can just sit here until something comes to mind. We did sit in silence for several minutes, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Eventually, words began to trickle out about the train station, about the years of feeling gradually erased from Dad's life, about the confusion of still loving someone who had hurt me so deeply. It's normal to have conflicting feelings, Dr. Keller assured me. Love doesn't just switch off because someone disappoints us. Over the next few weeks, a pattern emerged in our sessions. I'd start hesitantly, uncertain what to focus on, then find myself pouring out thoughts and feelings I hadn't even acknowledged to myself. I keep thinking that if I had been enough, funny enough, smart enough, interesting enough, he wouldn't have replaced me, I confessed during a breakthrough session in late January. Dr. Keller leaned forward, her expression serious. Morgan, I want you to really hear this. There is nothing a child can be or do that makes them deserving of abandonment. Nothing. Your father's choices reflect his limitations, not your worth. It was similar to what Rachel had told me, but somehow hearing it in the safe space of therapy, from a professional who had no stake in making me feel better, carried different weight. For the first time, I began to consider that maybe, just maybe, the problem wasn't me. School had become challenging in the aftermath of Thanksgiving. My grades had slipped as I struggled to concentrate. My English teacher, Mrs. Bennett, pulled me aside after class one day in February. Is everything okay, Morgan? She asked, her brow furrowed with concern. This essay isn't up to your usual standard. I'd always been a strong writer, often losing myself in stories and assignments as an escape from home stress. But lately, words felt heavy and elusive. I'm fine, I said automatically, the response I'd been giving everyone. Mrs. Bennett gave me a look that said she didn't believe me but wouldn't push. If you ever want to talk, my door is always open. And if you need an extension on the next assignment, just ask. I nodded, throat tight with unexpected emotion at her kindness. The school counselor, Mr. Chin, also reached out after being notified of my dropping grades. He helped arrange academic accommodations, extended deadlines for major assignments, and permission to use the quiet room during lunch if I needed a break from the social chaos of the cafeteria. Slowly, with this support network developing around me, I began to emerge from the worst of my depression. I reconnected with my best friend, Avery, who had been texting regularly despite my lack of response. Movie night, she suggested one Friday in late February. My mom said she'd pick you up. We got that horror film you wanted to see. I almost declined automatically, but caught myself. Isolating wasn't helping. Yeah, I said instead. That sounds good. That night at Avery's house was the first time I laughed genuinely in months. The movie was terrible in the best possible way, with special effects so bad we couldn't help but mock them. Avery's mom made nachos and pretended not to notice as we ate directly from the serving plate. For a few hours, I felt like a normal teenager again. Dad's communications had become increasingly sporadic. A text on my birthday with "Happy birthday, Morgie," but no call. A random message asking if I was still doing that art thing, though I'd never been particularly artistic. It had been Avery who was into painting. Each interaction underscored how little he knew about my life now, how little effort he made to stay connected in any meaningful way. The Valentine's Day card hit particularly hard. Inside the generic card was a gift card to a restaurant chain and a note saying, "Treat yourself to dinner. Love, Dad." As if a $25 gift card could compensate for his absence. As if treating myself to a solo dinner was what a 14-year-old wanted on Valentine's Day. Mom found me crying in my room after the card arrived. She sat beside me on the bed, rubbing circles on my back the way she had when I was small. I keep waiting to stop caring, I sobbed. Why do I still care so much? Because you have a big heart, Mom said simply. And because he's your dad, no matter what. The love you feel for him says beautiful things about you, Morgan, even if his actions don't deserve it. As winter gave way to spring, I became aware of the financial strain my therapy was placing on our already tight budget. Even with the sliding scale, The weekly sessions were an expense we could barely afford. I overheard Mom on the phone with the dental office manager, asking for extra shifts. "We need the money for Morgan's treatment," she was saying quietly, thinking I couldn't hear from my bedroom. "It's really helping her." The next day, I approached our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Winters, who had mentioned needing help with her garden as the weather improved. "I'd like to work for you on weekends," I said. "Whatever you need, weeding, planting, anything." Mrs. Winters, retired teacher with arthritic hands and a kind smile, agreed immediately. "I could use the help, dear. And the company." Working in her garden became therapeutic in its own way. There was something healing about digging in the dirt, planting seeds, watching things grow. Mrs. Winters would bring me lemonade and tell stories about her teaching days, never prying into my personal life, but creating space for me to share if I wanted to. When I received my first payment, $40 for a weekend's work, I felt a surge of pride and independence. I immediately gave half to Mom toward my therapy costs, despite her protests. "You earn that money," she argued. "And I want to help," I insisted. "We're a team, right?" Her eyes filled with tears as she accepted the worn $20 bill. The best team. In April, my English class was assigned a personal essay on family dynamics. Mrs. Bennett gave us broad latitude with the topic, encouraging us to explore whatever aspect resonated most. I stared at the blank document on my laptop for hours before the words finally came. I wrote about waiting at Union Station, about the Instagram photos revealing the truth, about the slow erasure that had preceded that moment. I wrote about Mom working double shifts to compensate for missing child support, about therapy teaching me that parents were fallible humans, about learning to define family by actions rather than blood. When I finished, the essay was raw and honest in a way that terrified me. I almost deleted it, almost wrote something safer about holiday traditions or sibling relationships. Instead, I printed it out and brought it to my next session with Dr. Keller. "I wrote this for English class," I said, handing her the pages. "But I'm scared to turn it in. It feels too exposed." Dr. Keller read it carefully, her expression thoughtful. When she finished, she looked up at me with respect in her eyes. "This is powerful writing, Morgan. But more importantly, it shows tremendous growth in how you're processing what happened. The question isn't whether you should turn it in, it's whether you're ready to own this narrative publicly." I considered her words. If I turn it in, it makes it all real. Official. "It is real," she said gently. "Whether you share it or not." After much deliberation, I submitted the essay. Mrs. Bennett called me to her desk when she returned our graded papers. "Morgan," she said quietly, "this is exceptional work. With your permission, I'd like to submit it to the school literary magazine." My immediate instinct was to refuse, to keep my pain private. But something stopped me. Maybe sharing my story could help someone else feeling replaced or abandoned. "Okay," I agreed. "But can I use just my first name?" "Of course." That evening, Mrs. Bennett called Mom to discuss the essay. I sat nervously at the kitchen table, watching Mom's face as she listened. "Yes, that's accurate," she said at one point, her voice tight. "No, I don't object to it being published." After hanging up, she hugged me fiercely. "I'm so proud of you for writing that. For telling your truth." 2 weeks later, Dad called. Not texted, called. My stomach dropped when I saw his name on the screen. "Morgan," he said when I answered, his voice unusually serious. "I got an email from your English teacher." My blood ran cold. "What?" "Mrs. Bennett reached out to both parents about some essay you wrote. About Thanksgiving." I hadn't considered that the school would contact Dad. Suddenly, I felt exposed, vulnerable. "It wasn't just about Thanksgiving," I said defensively. "It was about everything." "Well, I'd like to read it," he said, an edge to his voice. "Since apparently it's going to be published." "Why?" I challenged, anger rising. "You haven't been interested in anything else I've written or done." "That's not fair, Morgan. I've been busy with your real family," I finished for him. "I know." The silence stretched between us, taut with years of hurt. "I am your family too," he finally said, his voice strained. "No," I replied, the words surprisingly steady. "Family shows up. Family doesn't abandon people at train stations. Family doesn't lie about why. I could hear him inhale sharply. I made one mistake. It wasn't one mistake. My voice rose despite my effort to stay calm. It was years of canceled visits and broken promises. It was making me feel like I don't matter anymore because you have new kids now. That's ridiculous, he snapped. You're being dramatic, just like your mother. The familiar deflection, the dismissal of my feelings as dramatic, ignited something in me. Don't you dare blame Mom for this. She's been working 2 jobs because you forget to pay child support. She's been picking up the pieces every time you disappoint me. She's been here, Dad. Where have you been? His voice hardened. I'm not having this conversation if you're going to be like this. Call me when you've calmed down and are ready to be reasonable. Reasonable? I echoed in disbelief. Is it reasonable to leave your daughter alone for hours in a train station? Is it reasonable to lie about why? Is it reasonable to blame me for being hurt by that? I'm hanging up now, he said coldly. This attitude of yours needs adjustment before we can have a relationship. As he had so many times before, Dad was making his love conditional on my behavior, on my willingness to accept scraps of his attention while pretending it was enough. No, I said with sudden clarity. I don't need an attitude adjustment. I need a father who cares about me. Call me when you're ready to be that person. I ended the call before he could respond, my heart pounding, but a strange sense of calm washing over me. I had finally spoken my truth to him directly, without apology or self-blame. Mom appeared in my doorway moments later, concern etched on her face. I heard you talking. Was that your dad? I nodded, still processing what had just happened. He's upset about the essay. Mom sat beside me on the bed. Are you okay? I considered the question carefully. Actually, yes. I told him how I really feel, without worrying about making him angry or him leaving. Because he already left, so what more can he do? Mom wrapped an arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. I'm sorry he's not the father you deserve, Morgan. But I'm so proud of the person you're becoming, someone who stands up for herself, who tells her truth. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me, not healing exactly, not yet, but the beginning of something new. A sense that I could build a life that wasn't defined by Dad's absence, that I was more than the daughter he'd left behind. January brought not just a new year, but my first session with Dr. Keller, the therapist Mom had found through a community mental health center. Her office was painted a soft blue, with plants crowding the windowsills and comfortable chairs instead of the clinical setting I'd imagined. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to talk about, I admitted after the initial paperwork was complete. Dr. Keller smiled. There's no supposed to here, Morgan. This is your space. We can talk about whatever feels important to you. That first session was awkward. I answered her questions with minimal detail, afraid to dive too deeply into feelings that still felt raw and overwhelming. Dr. Keller didn't push, simply creating a foundation of trust that would support more difficult conversations in the weeks to come. By our third session, I'd begun to open up more. I brought my journal, a gift from Mom at Christmas, where I'd been recording thoughts too painful to say aloud. May I read you something? I asked hesitantly. Of course, Dr. Keller responded, leaning forward slightly. I opened to an entry from a particularly bad night. Sometimes I wonder if I was ever enough. If I was ever what he wanted. Maybe I was too loud or too quiet or too needy or too independent. Maybe if I'd been a boy instead of a girl. Maybe if I were better at sports or prettier or smarter. Maybe if I hadn't gotten my mom's laugh or her stubbornness. Maybe if I were more like Diane, polished and perfect. Maybe if I were a baby who needed him instead of a teenager who pretends not to. Maybe if I were different in all the ways that make me who I am, he would have stayed. He would have shown up. My voice broke on the last sentence. Dr. Keller waited, giving me space to collect myself. Morgan, she said finally, what would you say to a friend who wrote that? Who believed they weren't enough to deserve their parents' love? The question caught me off guard. I'd tell them that's not how love is supposed to work. That children shouldn't have to earn their parents' attention or care. And why does that apply to your friend, but not to you? I had no answer for that. In our next session, Dr. Keller introduced the concept of cognitive distortions, the ways our minds twist reality when we're hurting. You've been engaging in personalization, she explained, taking responsibility for your father's actions. But his choices reflect his limitations, not your worth. These sessions became the foundation of my healing process. Slowly, I began to untangle my self-worth from Dad's approval. I learned to identify the negative thought patterns that had become habitual. I'm not important enough. I'm too much trouble. No one will prioritize me. The school counselor, Mr. Chin, also became an unexpected source of support. After noticing my slipping grades, he called me into his office. "Morgan," he said kindly, "your teachers are concerned. You've always been an excellent student, but something seems to be affecting your work lately." Under his gentle questioning, I found myself explaining the Thanksgiving abandonment and its aftermath. To my surprise, Mr. Chin didn't offer platitudes or dismiss my feelings. "That's a significant trauma," he said seriously. "And it's affecting your ability to concentrate, which is completely understandable." He helped arrange academic accommodations, extended deadlines for major assignments, permission to take tests in the quiet room if needed, and a pass to visit his office whenever things became overwhelming during the school day. "School should be a safe place," he explained. "These accommodations aren't special treatment, they're removing barriers created by circumstances beyond your control." For the first time, I began to see my struggles not as personal failures, but as normal responses to an abnormal situation. February arrived with Valentine's Day decorations covering the school hallways. The holiday had never bothered me before. I wasn't dating anyone, so it had always just been about chocolate and friendship cards. But this year, the emphasis on love and family felt like salt in a wound. A card arrived from Dad, containing a gift card to a restaurant chain and a generic message printed by Hallmark with only his signature added. No personal note, no acknowledgement of our last conversation, no real connection, just an obligatory gesture that felt emptier than no gesture at all. I showed the card to Dr. Keller in our next session. "What does this make you feel?" she asked. "Angry," I said immediately, surprising myself with the force of the emotion. It's like he thinks a gift card makes up for everything. Like I'm a business acquaintance he sends an annual token to, not his daughter. "Anger is a perfectly appropriate response to being devalued," Dr. Keller affirmed. "The question is, what do you want to do with that anger? How can it serve you rather than consume you?" We spent that session discussing healthy expressions of anger, journaling, physical exercise, creative outlets, versus destructive ones like lashing out or turning the anger inward as depression. Around this time, I began to notice the financial strain my therapy was placing on our already tight budget. Mom never complained, but I saw her checking the bank balance more frequently, calculating expenses with a furrowed brow, taking on extra weekend shifts at the coffee shop. One night, I overheard her on the phone with the dental office manager. "If there are any additional shifts available, I'd like to be considered," she was saying. "Yes, even the early morning ones." "No, it's fine. We need the money for Morgan's treatment." It's really helping her. The guilt was immediate and overwhelming. Mom was already working so hard, and now she was taking on even more because of me. The next morning, I approached our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Winters, who had mentioned needing help with her garden as spring approached. "I'd like to work for you on weekends," I offered. "Whatever you need, weeding, planting, mowing. I'm stronger than I look." Mrs. Winters, retired teacher with arthritic hands, but a sharp mind, agreed immediately. "I could use the help, dear. And the company." That weekend began a new routine. I'd spend Saturday mornings and Sunday afternoons at Mrs. Winters' house, tending her extensive garden under her direction. She was knowledgeable about plants and patient with my mistakes, teaching me the difference between weeds and seedlings, when to water and when to prune. The physical labor was therapeutic in ways therapy itself couldn't be. There was immediate satisfaction in seeing a freshly weeded bed, in watching plants I'd tended begin to flourish. The repetitive tasks gave my mind space to process while keeping my hands busy. Mrs. Winters would bring me lemonade and cookies, sitting in her porch chair while I worked, telling stories about her 50 years of teaching middle school. "Children that age are caterpillars," she told me once. "All potential, in the awkward stage between what they were and what they'll become. It's a privilege to witness that transformation, even the messy parts. When she paid me for the first weekend's work, $40 that represented hours of effort, I felt a surge of pride and independence. I immediately offered half to Mom toward my therapy costs. "You earn that money," she protested. "It's yours to keep." "And I want to help," I insisted. "We're a team, right?" The look of surprise and love on her face as she accepted the worn $20 bill was worth more than keeping the money for myself. My first genuine laugh after Thanksgiving came during a movie night with Avery in late February. She had been texting regularly despite my withdrawal, never pushing, but making it clear she was there when I was ready. When she suggested a horror movie marathon at her house, something in me responded to the normalcy of the invitation. "My mom said she'd pick you up," Avery added, removing any excuses I might have made. That night at Avery's house, watching a spectacularly bad horror film with terrible special effects, I found myself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months. Avery's mom made nachos and pretended not to notice as we ate directly from the serving plate, discussing the illogical decisions of the movie's characters. "If you hear a strange noise in the basement, you don't go investigate in your underwear," Avery declared, throwing a popcorn kernel at the screen. "That's just horror movie 101. Especially not while announcing, 'Hello? Is anyone there?'" I added, mimicking the actress's breathless delivery. We dissolved into giggles, and for a few hours, I felt like a normal teenager again, not the girl abandoned at a train station, not the daughter being erased from her father's life, just Morgan hanging out with her best friend on a Friday night. The healing wasn't linear. There were still bad days when grief would ambush me unexpectedly. A father-daughter dance announcement at school left me hiding in the bathroom during lunch. A classmate complaining about her dad being too protective made me want to scream that she should appreciate his concern. Dad's communications continued to decrease. After the Valentine's card, there was silence until my birthday in March, when he sent a text saying simply, "Happy birthday, Morgie." No call, no visit, no real acknowledgement of the milestone. I showed the text to Mom, who had become my sounding board for all dad-related communications. "How do you feel about it?" she asked carefully. I considered the question. A month ago, I would have been devastated. Now I'm just not surprised. My lowered expectations were a form of self-protection, Dr. Keller explained in our next session. You're creating emotional safety by anticipating disappointment. That's a natural response. The goal isn't to keep expecting more from someone who consistently delivers less, but to build your life around the people who show up reliably. As spring began to green the world outside, I found myself drawn to writing as an emotional outlet. The journal Mom had given me for Christmas was nearly full of entries, raw and honest in a way I couldn't be in conversation. When Mrs. Bennett assigned a personal essay on family dynamics in English class, something in me responded to the opportunity to shape my experience into a coherent narrative. I wrote about waiting at Union Station, about the Instagram photos revealing the truth, about the slow erasure that had preceded that moment. I wrote about Mom working double shifts, about therapy teaching me that parents were fallible humans, about learning to define family by actions rather than blood. When I finished, the essay was far more revealing than I'd intended. I almost didn't turn it in, afraid of the vulnerability it represented. But there was power in telling my story on my terms, in transforming private pain into something with form and purpose. Mrs. Bennett called me to her desk when she returned our graded papers the following week. "Morgan," she said quietly, "this is exceptional work. With your permission, I'd like to submit it to the school literary magazine." My immediate instinct was to refuse, to keep my pain private. But something stopped me. Maybe sharing my story could help someone else feeling replaced or abandoned. Okay, I agreed. But can I use just my first name? Of course. What I didn't anticipate was Mrs. Bennett sharing her own experience after class that day. "I had a similar situation with my father when I was 16, she told me as I gathered my books. Different circumstances, but the same feeling of being suddenly expendable." I looked up in surprise. Mrs. Bennett, with her organized classroom and coordinated outfits, seemed like someone whose life had always been perfectly arranged. "What happened?" I asked. He left for a business trip and just didn't come back. Started a new life in another state. It shaped me in ways I'm still discovering decades later. Does it ever stop hurting? The question escaped before I could filter it. Mrs. Bennet considered this thoughtfully. The pain changes. It becomes less raw, more integrated into your understanding of yourself and the world. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, it becomes a source of strength and empathy you wouldn't have developed otherwise. Her words stayed with me, offering a glimpse of a possible future where my experience wasn't just damage to overcome, but potentially a foundation for something valuable. As spring progressed toward summer, I found myself gradually re-engaging with life. I reconnected with friends I'd withdrawn from, joined Avery for study sessions at the library, and even signed up for a summer writing workshop at the community college. Dad's contact continued to be sporadic and superficial. A text asking if I was still doing that art thing, though I'd never been particularly artistic. It had been Avery who was into painting. A message about a movie he thought I might like, though it was in a genre I'd never enjoyed. Each interaction underscored how little he knew about my life now, how little effort he made to stay connected in any meaningful way. The essay was published in the school literary magazine in May. I felt both nervous and proud seeing my words in print, my experience validated as something worth sharing. Several classmates told me they'd been moved by the piece, and one girl confided that she was going through something similar with her mom. It helped to know I'm not the only one, she said shyly during lunch. That someone else gets it. That unexpected connection was healing in its own way, the realization that my pain, transformed into words, could create bridges to others navigating similar waters. As the school year drew to a close, I found myself in a different place than I'd been in the depths of winter. Not healed, not entirely, but moving in that direction. The abandoned girl at Union Station was still part of me, but no longer the whole of me. I was building something new from the broken pieces of that November day, something that might, eventually, be stronger at the mended places. Part 7. Transformation and Growth. Summer arrived with unexpected warmth, both meteorological and emotional. The writing workshop I'd signed up for at the community college turned out to be transformative in ways I hadn't anticipated. Twice a week, I joined 12 other students of various ages in a classroom with large windows overlooking a small campus pond. The instructor, Professor Amelia Harris, was a published author with kind eyes and a no-nonsense approach to feedback. Writing about trauma, she told us during the first session, requires a delicate balance. Too close, and you're still in it, unable to shape the narrative. Too distant, and you lose the emotional truth that makes the story worth telling. For our first major assignment, she asked us to write about a significant life event from a slightly fictionalized perspective, changing names, locations, or details while maintaining the emotional core of the experience. I began writing about a girl named Maddie abandoned at an airport rather than a train station, her father leaving her for a business opportunity rather than a theme park visit. The fictionalization created a thin protective layer between me and the raw experience, allowing me to examine it with slightly more objectivity. Professor Harris called me aside after reading my submission. "This is powerful work, Morgan. The distance you've created is just enough to let you tell the truth without being consumed by it. It's still hard to write, I admitted." "Of course it is," she said matter-of-factly. "You're excavating pain and reshaping it into art. That's difficult, worthy work." Summer arrived with unexpected warmth, both meteorological and emotional. The writing workshop I'd signed up for at the community college turned out to be transformative in ways I hadn't anticipated. Twice a week, I joined 12 other students of various ages in a classroom with large windows overlooking a small campus pond. The instructor, Professor Amelia Harris, was a published author with kind eyes and a no-nonsense approach to feedback. Writing about trauma, she told us during the first session, requires a delicate balance. Too close, and you're still in it, unable to shape the narrative. Too distant, and you lose the emotional truth that makes the story worth telling. For our first major assignment, She asked us to write about a significant life event from a slightly fictionalized perspective, changing names, locations, or details while maintaining the emotional core of the experience. I began writing about a girl named Maddie abandoned at an airport rather than a train station, her father leaving her for a business opportunity rather than a theme park visit. The fictionalization created a thin protective layer between me and the raw experience, allowing me to examine it with slightly more objectivity. Professor Harris called me aside after reading my submission. "This is powerful work, Morgan. The distance you've created is just enough to let you tell the truth without being consumed by it." "It's still hard to write," I admitted. "Of course it is," she said matter-of-factly. "You're excavating pain and reshaping it into art. That's difficult, worthy work." Under her guidance, I expanded the piece throughout the summer, developing it into a short story that explored not just the abandonment, but its aftermath, the therapy, the garden work, the reconfiguration of family and self. Meanwhile, Dad missed my middle school graduation in June. He texted the day before saying he couldn't make it because of work commitments, but an Instagram post from Diane showed them at a lakeside cabin that weekend, the twins playing in the shallow water. I showed the post to Mom without comment. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," she said, her expression sad but unsurprised. "It's okay," I replied, and was startled to realize I meant it. Not that his absence didn't hurt, it did, but that I'd stopped organizing my emotional life around his potential approval or attention. "You'll be there." "And Mrs. Winters said she's coming too." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, we will." The graduation ceremony was held in the school gymnasium, decorated with blue and silver streamers. When my name was called, I heard Mom and Mrs. Winters cheering from the audience. Afterward, they took me to dinner at a restaurant nicer than we usually could afford. "A special occasion deserves a special celebration," Mom declared, ordering appetizers along with our main courses. As we ate, I realized something important. The absence I'd been so acutely aware of was being filled by chosen family, my mother, who worked double shifts to provide for me, Mrs. Winters, who had become a surrogate grandmother, Avery and her mom, who had given me space when I needed it and welcome when I was ready. Dad's chair at the celebration dinner remained empty, but the table was still full. The most significant shift in my recovery came with a decision I made shortly after graduation. For months, I'd been waiting for Dad's texts, hoping each one might contain a real connection or acknowledgement. I'd respond immediately, regardless of what I was doing, as if my availability might somehow earn his attention. One day in July, a text arrived while I was deep in conversation with Professor Harris about my writing project. I felt the familiar impulse to check it immediately, to drop everything for the possibility of Dad's attention. Instead, I left my phone in my bag until after our meeting. When I finally read the message, another generic, "How's your summer going?" I decided to wait until evening to respond. Not out of petty retaliation, but from a growing sense that I deserved to prioritize my actual engagements over the hope of his virtual presence. That small boundary, not organizing my time around his infrequent communications, represented a seismic shift in our relationship dynamic. I was no longer the desperate daughter waiting at the station. I was becoming a person with her own center of gravity. High school loomed on the horizon, both intimidating and exciting. The massive building with its multiple wings and specialized classrooms felt like a concrete representation of the expanded life awaiting me. At orientation in August, I met my new guidance counselor, Mr. Patel, who had already received notes from Mr. Chin about my situation. "If you need accommodations again this year, just let me know," he said kindly. "And my door is always open." The first day of high school arrived with the usual mix of excitement and anxiety, but I felt different walking through those doors than I had a year earlier. The abandoned girl at the train station had begun a transformation, not complete, but in progress. I made eye contact, asked questions in class, joined Avery for lunch in the crowded cafeteria. In English, I found myself raising my hand to answer questions, the confidence from my summer writing workshop carrying over. The teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, stopped me after class the first week. "Your insights and discussion are exceptional, Morgan," she said. Have you considered joining the school newspaper? We need writers who can analyze deeply. That invitation led to another significant step in my recovery journey. The newspaper advisor, Mr. Walker, assigned me a column after reading samples of my writing. Society tells teenagers their perspectives aren't valuable, he said. I disagree. You have a unique voice that deserves amplification. My first piece about the arbitrary distinctions between broken and blended families was published in September. I argued that the terminology itself created harmful expectations, that broken implied something that could or should be fixed, while blended suggested a smooth integration that rarely matched reality. Dad texted on my 15th birthday in March with the same cursory, "Happy birthday, Morgie," as the previous year. This time, I felt a surprising absence of disappointment. I'd stopped expecting more, not as a form of pessimism, but as an acceptance of reality. I responded with a simple thanks and turned my attention back to the birthday lunch Mom had arranged with Avery and 2 new friends from the newspaper staff. That spring, a significant opportunity emerged through school. The English department sponsored an essay contest for sophomores and juniors, with the winner receiving a scholarship for a summer writing program at the state university. Despite being a freshman, Ms. Rodriguez encouraged me to submit. The worst they can say is no, she pointed out. And your work is already at a higher level. I decided to rework and expand the piece I developed during the summer workshop, the fictionalized account of abandonment and its aftermath. Over several weeks, I refined it with feedback from Ms. Rodriguez and Mr. Walker, polishing the prose while maintaining the emotional truth at its core. The essay won. When the department chair called me to her office to tell me, I stood frozen in disbelief. But I'm a freshman, I stammered. The contest was for upperclassmen. The judges didn't know that, she said with a smile. We removed names and grades before evaluation. Your work stood on its own merits, Morgan. The validation was overwhelming. Not just the recognition, but the knowledge that my pain, transformed through craft and perspective, had created something of value. The experience that had once left me feeling worthless had become the foundation for achievement. The school newspaper published a feature about the contest, including excerpts from my winning essay. Somehow, through social media sharing, the piece found its way to Dad. His text came on a Saturday morning. Saw your article. Didn't know you were writing about this. We should talk. A year earlier, I would have dropped everything to respond, desperate for any acknowledgement. Now, I considered his message carefully, discussing it with Mom and Dr. Keller before deciding how to proceed. What do you want from a conversation with him? Dr. Keller asked during our session. I thought about it honestly. I want him to acknowledge what happened. Not just at the station, but the years before and after. I want him to see me, really see me. Those are reasonable wants, she affirmed. The question is whether he's capable of meeting them. After careful consideration, I responded to Dad's text. I'm available to talk Sunday afternoon between 2 and 4 p.m. You can call then if you want to. Setting that boundary, a specific time window rather than dropping everything for his convenience, was another small but significant shift in our dynamic. Dad called at 3:30 p.m. that Sunday, half an hour before my availability window closed. I read your essay, he said after awkward greetings. It's very well written. Thank you, I responded, waiting rather than rushing to fill the silence. It's also very one-sided, he continued, a defensive edge entering his voice. You didn't mention how difficult you made things with Diane, how unwelcoming you were with the twins. The old Morgan would have apologized, would have accepted blame to maintain connection. The new Morgan took a deep breath. That's not true, I said calmly. I tried very hard with Diane. I played with the twins whenever I was allowed. I adjusted to all the changes in our relationship without complaint. What I couldn't adjust to was being abandoned at a train station while you went to an amusement park. That was one incident. It wasn't just one incident, I interrupted, surprising myself with my firmness. It was years of cancellations and broken promises. It was gradually being erased from your life. The station was just the most obvious example. There was a long pause. When Dad spoke again, his voice had changed, the defensiveness replaced by something more thoughtful. I didn't see it that way, he said quietly. I know, I replied. That's part of the problem. We talked for nearly an hour, not resolving everything, but having perhaps the most honest conversation since the divorce. Dad didn't fully acknowledge his role in my pain, but he listened without dismissing my experience as dramatic or one-sided. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a shift, the beginning of a new dynamic where I didn't need his approval but could engage with him on more equal terms. As my freshman year drew to a close, I found myself in a significantly different place than I'd been the previous fall. The newspaper column had given me a voice and community. The essay contest had validated my writing and secured a spot in the summer university program. Therapy had helped me understand that Dad's limitations weren't my failure. Most importantly, I'd stopped waiting for Dad to become the father I needed and started building a life rich with other connections. Mom, whose sacrifices and support never wavered. Mrs. Winters, whose garden had become a sanctuary of growth. Avery, whose friendship had weathered my withdrawal. The new friends and mentors I'd found through writing. That Thanksgiving, 1 year after the train station, Mom and I started a new tradition. Instead of trying to recreate a conventional holiday, we volunteered at a community dinner before having our own small celebration at home. The contrast with the previous year's devastation wasn't lost on either of us. "You've come so far," Mom said as we ate pumpkin pie on the couch, a movie queued up on our laptop. "We've come far," I corrected her. "I couldn't have done it without you." My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. "Happy Thanksgiving. Hope you're doing well." I read it, set the phone aside, and turned my attention back to Mom and our movie. I would respond tomorrow or perhaps the next day. The text could wait. Our new tradition couldn't. The abandoned girl at the train station was still part of me, but she was no longer the whole of my story. She had become, instead, the beginning of a different journey, one where I defined family by actions rather than blood, where worth wasn't determined by a father's attention, where abandonment had led, paradoxically, to a more authentic sense of self. I didn't know then what my relationship with Dad would become in the years ahead. I didn't know about the half-siblings who might one day seek connection separate from him, or how forgiveness might eventually arise not from forgetting, but from understanding. All I knew was that I was no longer waiting at any stations, metaphorical or literal. I was moving forward on my own path, step by determined step. 10 years have passed since that November day at Union Station. I'm now 24, a journalism graduate working for a digital magazine where I write about family dynamics and relationships. The abandoned 14-year-old girl seems both intimately familiar and distantly remembered, like a character in a story I know by heart but have outgrown. The healing didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a straight line from trauma to recovery, but a winding path with setbacks and unexpected turns. There were still holidays that stung, milestones that highlighted Dad's absence, moments when old wounds reopened without warning. College brought new challenges and opportunities for growth. I chose a school 6 hours from home, far enough to establish independence, but close enough to maintain my relationship with Mom, who remained my most steadfast support. My journalism major emerged naturally from years of writing for the high school newspaper, that first column about broken versus splendid families evolving into a career exploring how family structures shape our lives. Dr. Keller and I continued our therapy sessions throughout high school, gradually decreasing the frequency as I developed stronger coping skills. Before I left for college, she gave me a parting gift, a journal with a compass embossed on the leather cover. "To remind you that you always know your own true north," she said, "even when the path isn't clear." My relationship with Dad found a new equilibrium over time. After the conversation sparked by my essay publication, we established a different kind of connection, less frequent but more honest, with boundaries I maintained firmly. He never became the father I had longed for as a child, but we developed a relationship on new terms, one where I no longer expected him to fill roles he wasn't capable of occupying. I see him a few times a year now, usually on my terms, coffee when I'm in Chicago for work, occasional holiday visits that I can leave when I choose. He's mellowed somewhat, less defensive about the past, occasionally capable of genuine interest in my life. I've accepted that this is likely as good as it will get, and there's a certain peace in that acceptance. One unexpected development came during my sophomore year of college, when Connor, one of the twins, reached out through social media. "I found your articles online," his message read. "I never knew about what happened at the station. Can we talk sometime?" That began a cautious relationship with my half-siblings, now teenagers themselves with their own complicated feelings about Dad. I've been careful to build connections with them separate from him, wanting them to know they're valued for themselves, not as extensions of our shared parent. Chloe joined our conversations a few months later, initially suspicious, but gradually warming to the idea of having an older sister. We meet for coffee when I'm in Chicago, text about music and movies, share the unique perspective of being Brian Taylor's children without that fact defining our entire relationship. "He's different with us than how you described him," Connor told me once. "But not entirely different. I see the pattern sometimes." That observation reflected a maturity beyond his years, an understanding that people can be multiple things simultaneously, that the father who abandoned me could also be the father who showed up for them, both realities existing in parallel. Forgiveness wasn't a single moment, but a process that unfolded gradually. It didn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't matter. Rather, it meant acknowledging the pain while choosing not to be defined by it, understanding that Dad's actions reflected his limitations rather than my worth. Through therapy, I came to see that Dad's behavior followed patterns established in his own childhood, the emotional unavailability he'd experienced from his father, the conflict avoidance that had characterized his parents' marriage. Understanding didn't excuse his choices, but it placed them in a context that made them comprehensible, less personal. Generational patterns only stop when someone decides to stop them, Dr. Keller had told me. That's the gift you're giving yourself and any family you might create in the future. Mom remains my model for resilience and unconditional love. After years of working double shifts, she finally received a promotion at the dental office that allowed her to quit the coffee shop job. She's dating a kind history teacher who values her in all the ways Dad didn't, who shows up consistently not just for her but for me as well. "You saved me," I told her recently over dinner, trying to express the depth of my gratitude for how she'd held our family of two together through the darkest times. "No, Morgan," she replied, taking my hand across the table. "We saved each other. My personal life has blossomed as well. I'm in a relationship with James, a graphic designer I met through work 2 years ago. Our connection developed slowly, built on friendship and mutual respect before evolving into something deeper. I was cautious at first, hypervigilant for signs of unreliability or abandonment that might echo my past. "I notice you get tense when plans change," James observed early in our relationship. "Even small changes." His perception created space for me to explain my history, to share the abandonment that had shaped my expectations. Instead of dismissing my reactions as dramatic or expecting me to simply get over it, he adapted, becoming meticulous about communication, transparent about changes, patient with my occasional need for reassurance. That's the thing about healing from abandonment. It doesn't mean never feeling the echo of old wounds. It means developing the resilience to recognize when present reactions are shaped by past experiences, the courage to communicate those reactions, and the wisdom to choose partners who respond with understanding rather than judgment. My work as a journalist focusing on family dynamics grew directly from my experience. After college internships at several publications, I landed at a digital magazine where I write about everything from the impact of divorce on children to cultural definitions of family to the psychology of estrangement. My personal history informs my professional perspective without overwhelming it, a balance that took years to achieve. One of my most meaningful projects has been moderating an online support group for young adults who experience parental abandonment. Twice monthly, I host virtual meetings where participants share stories, strategies, and solidarity. Witnessing others on various points of the healing journey has reinforced my own progress, while highlighting how much work remains to be done in understanding the long-term impacts of parental absence. You've given words to feelings I couldn't express, One group member told me after reading an article I'd written about the anniversary reactions that often accompany abandonment trauma. It's like you've been living in my head. That connection, the transformation of individual pain into collective understanding, represents the unexpected gift that emerged from that cold November day at Union Station. The 14-year-old girl waiting desperately for her father could never have imagined that her experience would one day help others navigate similar terrain, that her story would become a map for those similarly lost. Looking back at that girl from the perspective of a decade later, I feel immense compassion. She didn't know that being left behind would force her to move forward, that abandonment would ultimately lead to independence, that the empty space created by her father's absence would eventually be filled with chosen family and meaningful work. If I could speak to her now, I would tell her that the path ahead is neither straight nor easy, but it leads to a life richer and more authentic than she can imagine from the station bench where she sits crying. I would tell her that healing doesn't mean forgetting, that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, that family is defined by actions rather than blood. Most importantly, I would tell her that her worth was never determined by her father's presence or absence, that his leaving revealed his limitations, not hers. The journey from abandoned daughter to whole person remains ongoing. There are still holidays that bring a twinge of sadness, still moments when old insecurities resurface, still occasional dreams of waiting in vast, empty stations. But these experiences no longer define me. They're simply threads in a tapestry that includes love, success, connection, and purpose. Have you experienced abandonment or rejection from someone important in your life? How did you navigate the healing process, and what helped you move forward? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more personal narratives about family dynamics and resilience, and share with someone who might need to hear that being left behind doesn't define their worth. Thank you for witnessing my journey, and remember, sometimes the people who walk away create the space for something better to enter your life.